Thank you, Susan. So actually, today we have new member from the Thailand, but I think he has not joined our meeting yet. So once he joined our meeting, so we will have the brief time to give him some brief time in introducing himself to us. So yeah, and today's meeting will focus primarily on discussion related to the definition of the SSE. And to begin, Professor Mari will give a presentation titled Toward a Statistical Definition of SSE. And following the presentation, we will open the floor for discussion based on 8 guiding questions that were shared in technical note. And before our discussion, thank you for taking your time to provide such a well-organized response despite your busy schedule. And your answers have highlighted key points that need to be considered regarding the definition of SSE, and they will be very helpful for our future discussion. And after our discussion, following our discussion, the Hyung-Sik will briefly share some update and the point for consideration regarding the next step for the technical working group. And we expect today's meeting to last at 1.5 or 1.5 hour and possibly up to 2 hours. And if you have any question during the meeting, feel free to raise your hand or post them in the chat box. So before we move on to Mari's presentation, does anyone share anything to remark or anything to share? So I cannot.
Akanut is now in the meeting.
Okay. Hi, Akanut.
Hi.
Yes, so we have a new member today. So today we have a new member to our technical working group join. So welcome, Akanut. And could you mind us a brief self-introduction, Akanut?
Hi, everyone. My name is Akanat. Glad to be here.
Yeah, could you introduce yourself more brief? Yeah, a little bit more. Your background or yeah.
Why you're here?
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I am a researcher at the Institute of Asian Studies at Chulalongkorn University, and I am, I study the SSE landscape in Thailand, and right now I am on process of kind of campaigning, and I got advice from our authorities that in order to do that in a good manner, I should collect some kind of data from SSE entities so that I consult the team, the SSE in co-op team, and I hope I can learn from everyone how to conduct and collect statistics properly in order to campaign and promote SSE in Thailand.
Thank you, Akanut, and welcome to joining our technical working group.
The connection was. Thank you. The connection wasn't good. I just live 4 lanes, and probably I will have to leave at 2:45. So I just have to observe. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Akanut. And is there anyone to share something before we go into Mari's presentation? So if not, so yeah, Mari, could you go ahead with your presentation for our viewers?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I will share my screen. Just a second. Everyone see it?
Yes.
Can you see it? Okay. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. And thank you, everyone, for speeding up with us. As we said last time, we could not do this, but we're doing it anyhow. We are trying to present a first draft of what could be a statistical definition of the SSE. You all, I hope, received a document a little while ago, and many of you have commented that document. And so this presentation tries to include some of the comments that were made. And it's really for discussion purposes. This is not the final at all decision of what the statistical definition of the SSE may be. So first, in the document, I try to explain in my words what is a statistical definition and why we need one. I won't go into the details of all the concepts, but basically, why do we need a statistical definition? Well, so that we can have comparable data over many countries and through time about the SSE. And what does a statistical definition do? Well, it identifies the entities that are part of the SSE, and of course helps exclude the ones that are not. What we need to find in order, this is basically the same process as any statistical definition. What are the common characteristics of the entities of the SSE? What are the core differences between them and other types of entities? What are the reference concepts that help us understand why is this different? And what are the foundations for a typology of these entities? So what we have here, I'm trying to, okay, I made you disappear. I can see my screen now. Basically, the statistics world is full of entities. We need a set of criteria to filter which entities are part of the SSE in order to define the statistical population. To do this, we start from the legal definition. That could be your national definition of the SSE. It can be this, what we're working on here is the international institutional definition, which is the ILO and UN definition. From this definition, the legal, we'll call it, or institutional, we go down to a conceptual definition from which we identify the operational criteria to filter the population. So today we're discussing a framework, but of course, this framework doesn't mean, even when it will be adopted, doesn't mean that all SSE in all parts of the world will look the same. SSE takes different colors and configurations in different parts of the world. So you'll have models of SSE in different countries, but you'll be using the same concepts to describe it. Such as, for example, manpower. You know, you have many concepts to describe manpower, but work situations is not the same. Manpower configurations in different contexts is not the same in different countries. So it will be the same with the SSE. But here we have this resolution of the ILC, the International Labour Conference, that was adopted and from which we're starting. It's from this definition that we can see which entities of the SSE will be included in a statistical population. So breaking this down, we have two parts of a definition, which is usually the way the SSE is defined. The entities, the legal entities, the statistical units that are part of the SSE, but also the principles and values from which the SSE functions. So from the ILO definition, we can identify 5 common characteristics or principles. One is to serve the collective and or general interest, to function through mutual aid and voluntary participation, to implement democratic or participatory governance, to be autonomous and independent as an entity, and to give primacy to people over capital. The statistical units, the entities that are mentioned in the ILO definition are cooperatives, associations, mutual societies, foundations, social enterprises, self-help groups, and other similar organizations or form of exchange adopting SSC values and principles. So we won't answer these questions now. We'll have a period of questions at the end of my presentation, but these are the questions that are related to the principles or common characteristics or concepts, let's say. And then questions regarding if these entities are part of your definition, or which social enterprises should be included. We will also be able to discuss social enterprise after discussing the filters or requirements. So if we look at this operational definition that we can that comes out of the legal definition, we look at how the filters can be applied. We use here the first set of criteria or filters, which come from the SNA, the System of National Accounts, which has integrated the nonprofit institution and third sector organization satellite account criteria. So we have here 5 criteria that help identify SSC through basically nonprofit criteria. So the first is to be an identifiable institution. Well, that's for any statistics. You need to be able to see that it's distinct from other concepts. In the case of the SSC, entities should be institutionally separate from government. They are not permitted to distribute profits if it's a nonprofit institution, or they are significantly restricted in their ability to distribute profit. They are self-governing, that is to say that they are not subject to control by other units. And membership in the unit is neither obligatory nor automatic, but it involves some degree of voluntary participation. So this comes from the SNA. In order to cover the ILO definition of the SSC, which is larger than just being a nonprofit institution, we can add 3 criteria or 2. We'll see that later. So the organization should pursue a purpose of service to members, society, or the environment. This is mutual or general interest. Their members contribute to the organization's purpose by their participation in its activities. And they are democratically governed by members, and/or they favor the participation of members or employees in their governance bodies. If we look at, this is an addition from last night to my PowerPoint. If we look at the 5 concepts or 5 principles from the ILO definition, and we check if they are covered by these criteria, we can see that they're covered. We can even wonder if criteria G, their members contribute to the organization's purpose. Maybe that's not necessary. We can figure it out later, but this should cover the principles. So these are the questions that we will be discussing later on. So do these filters or requirements identify well the SSC? Are there other needed? Do they apply in your country? We'll discuss this later. So here we are with the crucial question: which social enterprises should be included in the SSC? The comments I've received from you on the document, the draft document, was that in most cases you do not include for-profit social enterprise that are allowed to distribute any profit to their shareholders. So I propose this theory of filter. The first that would be in scope would be the cooperative or the association or nonprofit institution that in your country is a social enterprise, either because it produces goods on the market, but are a cooperative or a nonprofit institution, or for other reasons. But if they correspond to the criteria, the requirements of the SSC, these 8 criteria we saw previously, well, they would be in scope. For others that are not cooperatives and not associations, but for which distribution is restricted, well, to see if that distribution is restricted, the requirements could be the following: no distribution of surplus or profits, this is how they're called in the SNA, related to capital contribution. Patronage refunds of surplus or profits is permitted, but as patronage refund, which we all know here is related to activity and not to capital contribution. Limited interest on capital contribution, and asset lock, which means the indivisibility of the financial reserves in case of lockdown. And if the distribution is not restricted and you still want to see them in the SSC, well, what should the requirements be? I put question marks because for my part, I don't know. So a conceptual framework for an SSC typology. Why do we need a typology? By the way, we have all these legal status that is a typology in itself. But as we know, they are not named the same way in different countries. And even when they are named the same way, they not necessarily look the same. So in order to understand the SSC population and to analyze its contribution to the economy, its way of functioning, to see why they are different, because it's a composite family, a typology might be useful. So this is the suggestion I made, but this working group may decide some other way. Based on your comments as well, you'll see in green what has been added from the document that you had received at first. So I had the suggested ownership, distribution of profit, and legal incorporation. Someone noticed that ownership and governance could be linked very closely. So I linked it to here. And that would bring 3 types of ownership and governance. So member, independent trustee, and community. I put a question mark because that came from a comment and I'm not sure exactly what it means. But I'm sure it means something that is translatable into statistical institutional units, and shareholders. So these would be the 3 or 4 types of ownership and governance types. In terms of distribution of profits, non-profit, which is the classical one, and for-profit, which is the classical one, and not for-profit, which is something that doesn't really match a concept other than limited distribution, not based on capital contribution, which of course we recognize are cooperatives and probably social enterprises that are part of the SSC. And legal incorporation, because we have self-help groups in our definition of the SSC, well, we need to see whether cooperative-like or association-like or mutual-like entities that are not registered or incorporated can be included in the SSC. So this is why we use this. So a comment about membership and governance. We can see that there's member-based organizations like cooperatives and mutual societies and associations, in which members could be natural persons and or legal entities. So you have a cooperative of cooperatives. So that's a legal entity membership with a direct interest in the organization's activities. I prefer the term direct interest to that of stakeholder, because stakeholder is a wider concept and probably more uncertain. So, and governance in the case of member-based organization is based on the principle of one person, one vote. That is also coming from your comments. And then we have non-member-based entities, like a charitable organization, public foundations. Members are not the beneficiaries, usually. They are created to serve the general interest or the collectivity. Governance, here I'm giving an example of a criterion. could be more than 50% of its directors, trustees, or like officials dealing with each other's at arm's length, which means a relationship where persons act independently of each other and who are not related. These definitions come from the Canadian environment, in which private foundations controlled by their funders, by the donors, would be excluded from the SSC. This is an example. It can be treated differently in different contexts, of course. So this brings us to this type. Normally you have one entity per type, but in this case, as is the case in other typologies, they're not always mutually exclusive. But in red, you see what I've moved or changed, and in green, what I've added from the last time from the document that I shared with you. So in this case, we saw that mutual societies, for example, can be nonprofit or they can be for-profit, and probably most mutual societies in Europe are nonprofit. Associations can be considered member-owned, and if they're trustee-owned, then they would be probably a charitable organization. And cooperative and association that are community-owned, well, the question mark is still there because that was a comment, but it was not elucidated that what is community in this case. And self-help group probably are community-owned, but this is a concept that probably needs to be clarified. So the discussion points that we'll have about the typology, are these criteria sufficient? Are they useful? And are there other that are needed? For the classification of SSC activities, I don't know if we'll have time to go very deep into this question today because it was not very much developed in the document I produced, but it's a question that we need to answer because many people are asking, how, now that we have a typology of entities, how do you classify the activities? And for this, we saw that the ISIC is not necessarily always useful because you have a very large residual category in which most of the SSC is, associations functioning in different fields of activities, and that's a too large group to analyze. So it seems that there is an ISIC revised, the fourth revision proposes an alternative aggregation for reporting on nonprofit institutions. And there is also the International Classification of Nonprofit Organizations, developed in 2003, updated in 2018, and integrated in the 2025 SNA. It contains 12 sections. But then again, they're meant to classify nonprofit institutions, but probably combining an ISIC and an ICNPO or equivalent can be useful, as the Quebec example shows. So the questions around this issue will be, do you classify SSC with these frameworks? Are there difficulties, and should we be using two classifications? What are the consequences of doing this? I produced appendixes because I don't know, as a university professor, you always put an appendix. One is to recall that there are international frameworks for statistics that exist. So we all know that these three frameworks, the CIRIEC 2006, which was a manual for satellite account of companies in the social economy, which covered cooperatives and mutual societies, still exists. The United Nations 2018 Handbook for Satellite Accounts on Nonprofit Institutions and Related Institutions and Volunteer Work, which was called Third Sector or Social Economy, exists. It covers nonprofit institutions, some social enterprises, cooperatives and mutual societies and direct volunteer work which means volunteering without involving organizations. We all, of course, know the guidelines concerning statistics of cooperatives, which were adopted in 2018. The issue being that the United Nations 2018 Handbook of Satellite Accounts on NPI did not mention or include the ILO 2018 guidelines on cooperatives. So that we were left at that point in 2018. The other international standards related to SSC are, of course, the System of National Accounts, which was recently revised and is still in a pre-edit version. We have the recent work on the volunteer work and measurement to measure volunteer work, and the very, very recent work. It dates of a long time, but it was recently ameliorated, the ICLS on informality. So these are the frameworks we can count on. The frameworks for SSE are inconsistent with the ILO definition. I've already mentioned this in my first presentation to this group in our joint launching meeting. But if we look at what are the entities in our view, we have the cooperatives, which the ILO very well defined in the guidelines, and we're working on how to measure their economic contribution right now. Mutual societies and cooperatives were captured by the Syriac manual. The United Nations 2018 nonprofit institution and related institutions modified the picture quite strongly. You have these dots showing the spectrum, which covers association foundations, but some social enterprises, probably not those that are for profit, some cooperatives, not all cooperatives, some mutual societies, not all mutual societies, and direct voluntary work, which was never considered in the other frameworks. With the volunteer work, we could try to see if we do include direct voluntary work, which is not part of the ILO definition, but we do have ILO directives on this, such as for informality, because in the ILO definition, we do have self-help groups and probably other informal SSE entities that are cooperative-like or association-like. So our job, our work, is to produce the ICLS 2028 definition of the SSE, which will include informal SSE entities, self-help groups, and probably social enterprises, maybe not those that are for profit. I don't know if it will include direct voluntary work. This is something we need to discuss. So I also put in the appendix, you can see it. So for those who are wondering, why do we talk about institutional sectors? This is the way the SNA classifies the institution in institutional sectors. These are the notes, and these are the list of reference. So now we're going to this discussion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, it was very clear and insightful overview of the key element for the developing a statistical definition of the SSE. So then let me share my screen. So then let us begin the discussion on the question that the Professor Mary introduced during the presentation. And among the previously shared question, we will not discuss the first question regarding the institutional definition of SSE separately. The information you shared on this topic will be reflected in the preparation of the report. And if you have not yet submitted your input on this matter, we kindly ask you to do so at a later time. So let's move on to question 2. So the focus of question 2 is on whether the main characteristic of the ILO SSC definition align with each country definition and any difference or conflicts. So would anyone like to share their thought on the question 2? Please raise your hand.
Nawan,
Yes.
I think also we can ask the participant to whether they have any technical question, clarifying question about
Okay.
what Mari presented first, then we can go to these things.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So is there anyone have question regarding the question? Anything to be clarified or yes, Ray, please go ahead.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you to Ma'am Marie for the presentation. In the Philippines, I don't know if this is a perfectly relevant question for the discussion for today. But in the Philippines, there is such a thing as Credit Surety Fund Cooperative. This is a new type of cooperative, a special type of cooperative, which was created by law in the year 2022. And the membership of this cooperative is coming from, number one, local government units, which are local government entities. Number two, government financial institutions. Two government banks are present. Number three, government guarantee fund institution. And then number four, well-capitalized and well-managed cooperatives. So it is organized on a province, per province basis. I don't know if we can call it a social solidarity economy organization, because it aside from its organizational aside from the nature of its organization, its business is surety surety, no? A collateral substitute. When a cooperative or micro, small, or medium-sized cooperatives is going to borrow a money or a fund from a bank, instead of collateral, the borrower will use the credit surety from this cooperative. So I think I will provide the law to you, to Sir Hyungsik, so that we can study if it falls under the definition of SSE under what so that we can also see if it's the characteristic, the common characteristics here as presented is present in such cooperative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for sharing the case of the Philippines. And so, Uma, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Navan. And thank you so much, Mari, for this very good presentation and giving good insights into the definition aspect. I was just wondering when you were talking about, and this is more a clarification to see how much we can expand in this group. Very clearly, self-help groups you brought in. At the same time, I was thinking about community development, and there are lots of initiatives that are there, especially in India, that I know of, like Water Users Association in the rural areas, which is also kind of an association that gets together, is voluntary at times, but also has a bit of a structure, and they manage the entire water using system in the rural areas for the farmers. And it could be at the village level, it could be multiple villages together at the low end and the high end, to see how everybody in that particular delta actually gets water. So I was just thinking how we would be treating that and whether that would come into the into the definition. Similarly, there is this initiative that I know of, it's called as Piplantari, which is basically about planting trees. The reason I also raise this because it's both society and environment in a way, and it's a very fine line between whether it's an NGO or a voluntary organization. So I was wondering, how would we go about capturing some of these such initiatives, which are very, very helpful? And then there are already existing institutions, and I'm just wondering whether, as we get into this SEC statistics, whether some of them which would have been identified elsewhere would be brought within this definition or not. And one that comes to my immediate mind is the Anand Milk Unions Limited, which was again, it could be part of a public or a private limited company, but then it's again a farmers association, which basically got together and started collecting milk from the villagers, and then they set up their own milk factory. So I'm just showing these examples to largely see how we can fit in within it. It has all these characteristics that you talk about. It serves a collective general interest. It's voluntary. It is democratic. There's a lot of autonomy and independence. And basically, then it gets to the question about what the boundaries that we are talking about. So that's the reason I'm raising this. Thank you so much. But that was a really fantastic presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Uma. Thank you. So bring up many cases and the point we think. So, and Marie, could you share your thought on Uma's comment or Uma's comment?
Yes. Well, regarding the credit surety fund, I think this question is about cooperatives, and we have guidelines on cooperatives, and probably this question would need to be looked at from the perspective of cooperatives, and not all cooperatives will be part of the SSC. But first, is it a cooperative, part of the cooperatives that the ILO has produced guidelines for? But it is an interesting case. I cannot answer on this one. What Uma is discussing is also something I cannot give the final answer to, but there are stimulating examples. But of course, community local development is typically part of the SSC in most countries. It was the ideal type of SSC at first. So probably what you have in view of self-help groups involved in community development would be part of the SSC. If it is an NGO or an NPI, I guess the governance issues will be the ones that will be scrutinized. And are NGOs part of the SSC? I guess it all depends how they function and what they are in different countries. These are stimulating questions and examples that we'll need to look at. There is probably also I didn't do any presentation about this here, but I could do it some other time. We often see the SSC as with frontiers that are a little bit permeable, because entities tend to come in and come out of it depending on how they are governed, if they are changing, for example, their field of activity and mobilize resources differently. And so they're not necessarily always stable. But when you do statistics, you take a picture and it's a Polaroid picture. You have the ones that are in at that moment. And of course, as I mentioned at first in my introduction, I think we'll have SSC models that are not the same from one country, from one institutional context to another. And the Indian case could be an interesting one to explore as to see how these entities fit in the concept. So I'm not answering, but I'm commenting that these are interesting questions.
Can I just
Thank you.
Yes, Uma.
follow
Yeah.
up? No, Mari, I think what you said is really good and would be good to scrutinize it more, because the more I get into this, sorry, I've been missing some of the meetings, but I started off since the last informal economy discussion, so makes me think. So in a way, when we think about statistics, we often have certain characteristics we look at, and we can easily identify whether they fall as part of one or the other. But what I see in the case of the SSE is probably we need to do quite a bit of probing and figuring out before we get into the question of classifying whether they fall into one or the other. So I guess what I'm saying is there's quite a bit of layered work that would be required as we get into it. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Uma. And is there anyone to introduce some interesting case regarding question 2?
If I may,
Yes.
now on.
Yes, Mary.
When we look at the answers we received from the questionnaires,
Mhm.
I think that these characteristics were more or less what people expected. So maybe if in your answer to the questionnaire, people around the table today, if you saw something, maybe you could mention it right away, because we saw the questionnaires, but not everyone saw the questionnaires. So maybe you could bring up whatever you noticed when you were answering the questions in the questionnaire. I've not made a compilation, but you are there, so you can mention it. But basically, I think that these characteristics were pretty much everyone pretty much agreed upon, if I'm right.
Yes. So based on the comment, the document that the members present, it sounds like overall there is a strong alignment on the core asset characteristics, and the difference tend to be about the scope. Yeah, some scope. So, and Eduardo, can I ask you, could you introduce some interesting case of the Portugal case regarding the question 2?
Yes, of course. So the question 2 was if they're aligned with my country, right?
Right.
And in our case, I would say yes. The majority of principles are well. To give you a little bit of context, in Portugal we have a framework law on social economy that clearly defines not only the principles that entities of this sector have to follow, and we understand them as guiding principles. This is important to notice. But also we clearly, well, essentially we explicitly mention some organizations that are within this sector, although we have a provision saying that other type of entities can be considered within the sector as long as they follow the principles of social economy, okay? This is also an important note. But essentially for us, all the main criteria that Marie identified and mentioned are clearly stated in our framework law. There are at least 2 main differences. In our case, for instance, when we talk about democratic control, we do not state clearly that it can also be understood as participatory governance. So we tend to understand it has, at least for the majority of organizations, as following the principle one person, one vote. But when we classify entities within our official statistics, we come to the conclusion that there are organizations that don't follow this criteria to the letter, especially religious organizations, so charitable associations, foundations. They can nominate their directors, for instance. So it's not a democratic process. So although our law is not clearly, or at least it seems a little bit more closed than the principle that is shown here, in reality, we tend to follow the principle as it was stated for us in this discussion. So I think it's completely aligned, even if at first glance it seems a little contradictory. And also, I think I stated this on my comment. I don't know if I said something else. Oh, there is an issue for us regarding social enterprises. In Portugal, we still don't have a legal, not even an operational definition of social enterprises. So in our official statistics, we don't categorize them, even if there are social enterprises, not formally, but there are. We would consider every cooperative a social enterprise in Portugal, at least, and other types of organizations. But there's still no clear definition. But one thing for sure, the discussions we're having tend to consider that to be regarded as or classified as a social enterprise, we would be talking about an organization that, if for profit, would have restrictions in the distribution of those profits. Okay. So yeah, this is, but they would have to follow every other principle of social economy. Okay.
Thank you, Eduardo. Yeah, that you mentioned how strictly the Council-like democratic governance interpret can vary, depend on the country. And the case of the social enterprise, we will visit that issue again at the later part of our discussion. And if anyone have had some comment on this question? Oh yeah, Melis, please go ahead.
I just want to add on the last point that Eduardo mentioned, because maybe we're going to be discussing it a bit later, but the issue of whether we include commercial companies or not. I don't represent a country, but for example, in France, if you have the ESUS label, the Solidarity Enterprise of Social Utility, there are obviously criteria around limited profit distribution, but it's, for example, set at 50%. So do we have to also specify, because I assume there will be a lot of variation across countries, and for some, maybe 50% will not even be agreeable, while in others it could even be higher than that. So I don't know if it would be too specific to seek even a maximum cap on this. And if we also include these commercial or for-profit companies, even if they comply with the criteria, I think one of the criteria also has to be not just limited distribution of profits, but also of capital gains, because these companies, I mean, it doesn't apply to associations, foundations, mutuals, etc. But if they can sell shares, they can also have some surpluses there. So in that case, we might want to keep the definition of surplus beyond profit as well, if our scope is gonna include commercial companies. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that the limit on limited profit distribution could be very different across countries. So that's something I think we can specify, or at least kind of have a caveat on.
Thank you, Melis. Yeah, that is also very tricky and important question, important point we need to discuss. And Hyung-sik, could you please go ahead?
Yeah, because I think this question is more the general part, because and I saw from the members' input, there was more kind of the general agreement on this. The main characteristics from the ISE the definition. So I think there are some important issues we can discuss. It's more related to after next questions. So we can go, for example, the issue with social enterprise, the profit distribution, or other things we can discuss further in probably next questions. So this part, I think we can pass, but David raised hand. So yeah.
Yeah. So before we move on to next question, yeah, please, David, please go ahead.
Sorry, did you say David? Please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, please go ahead, David.
Just coming back to the point that was last made about commercial companies that fit the criteria for a social enterprise but have some limitations on profit distribution. I think we have to include. We can't. My thinking there is there's not really possible to completely exclude them. Cooperatives, for example, are commercial companies, but they have a specific type of constitutional arrangement which limits profit distribution. If there are perhaps some companies that are not registered as cooperatives but registered in other ways, function like cooperatives, or have other characteristics that would allow them to fit within the broad definition of a social enterprise, I think it would be difficult, at least conceptually, to exclude them. The extent to which we find it necessary to count them would depend on whether they're particularly significant. But I think it's an issue that requires a little bit of discussion to determine what we think should be happening. And just coming back to Uma's comment, I think most of the types of informal enterprise that she discussed probably do need to be included within the SSE, but the challenge is to devise criteria to draw a clear boundary, so we at international level, so we can clearly decide which of these types of institutions should be included and which shouldn't. But I think that the general and important point here is that outside the highly developed world, in many developing countries, social and solidarity entities exist informally as part of the informal economy and do need to be included. And if we don't include them, we'll be underestimating the importance of the social and solidarity economy in those countries. The second challenge is how to measure them, which is another question.
Yeah, thank you, David. And you mentioned the informal economy issue. We definitely, not definitely, we might be revisit that issue at a separate session, whether how we deal with the informal economy when we tackling the SSE statistics. So we can more deeply discuss on that issue. And I think, yes, Mari, go ahead. Mari?
Yes,
yes.
I'm sorry. I don't seem to find how to raise my hand otherwise, other than
under
using the
React.
picture.
Under React.
I don't have a React. Maybe that's because I'm a host. But regarding commercial activities, and well, it's conducting economic production activity, or whatever you call it. There's one point that Chiara had raised regarding the criteria that we have, and maybe right now we're discussing all kinds of things, so maybe we should stop sharing that screen of question 2, because we're not discussing question 2 anymore. We're all over the place, which is good. Which is, I think, the best way to go. But Chiara mentioned that with the criteria that we had identified, which is the question regarding requirements now on, if you want to get to this screen, maybe, we could have trade unions included. We could have all kinds of associations, employers associations, whatnot, which usually in the social economy is not recognized as part of the social economy. You usually have a distinction between entities that produce goods and services in the social economy manner, and you have entities that are created for the defense of rights, such as trade unions, for the promotion of private interests, such as, well, anyway, I can't talk and look at the screen at the same time.
Okay.
I get distracted. You have church entities that are not usually recognized as social economy, and you have employers associations or chambers of commerce are not usually considered. But if you look at the criteria that we identified, which are the filters in our work, you probably would include them. So we need something, and usually the comment is they are enterprises. It's social economy enterprises, but we have organizations, and as Uma mentioned, the local development, self-help groups, community groups are part of our definition, but they are there also to produce goods and services to collectivities or people. Whereas trade unions are they may produce goods and services at the services of people and communities, but their main objective is to defend the defense of rights, such as churches. They have economic activities, they produce goods and services, but their main objective, their main purpose is to promote and to favor a religious reunion. So these are the tricky aspects when you look at just the criteria to filter your units. And when we were facing this, when we first created a conceptual framework for the Quebec social economy, we first filtered these historical exclusions from the institutional sectors. So the first filter was looking at institutional sectors and pulling out trade unions and churches. And once they are pulled out, then the criteria function, because you'll have the economic units that produce goods and services with the social and solidarity economy manner. So maybe that's a tricky way to look at it, but it did work for the for the purpose of the statistics we produced way back then.
Thank you, Mary. Simel, please go ahead.
I'm not sure. I think I wanted to say something about, I got stuck on the question mark from Marie, the community question mark. And I was wondering who added community and if they could address that. And community ownership and governance, how can that be translated into statistic terms? And is this about power? Is this about benefits? Is this about responsibilities and their distribution? I mean, there must be indicators. I mean, like percentage of equity, like being held by community members, so that could indicate the extent of the local financial stake, number of community, I don't know, shareholders, type of ownership. I mean, these are I think some of the things. But then I was also getting a little bit. There is ownership, but then there is also control. And I was wondering how you deal with control, because I think there's a lot of that. I know from the work around, you know, gender responsive statistics, for instance, you would have this issue. You may have ownership, but you don't have control. And this is always an important distribution. So I was wondering if anyone may have some insights on that. Decision-making, participation rate, I don't know. I was just wondering, how do we deal with control? I know it's not in the SNA, nor is it in the ILO definition, but is that a frontier that we think would be important to engage, especially when I think we are maybe looking at informal economy, when the workers support organizations. I think Joanne and maybe Uma will understand where I'm coming from, but yeah, that's it. Thanks. Over to you.
Oh, yes. Santos, please go ahead.
Thank you, Navon. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm keeping my video off because I was in the move. I've just entered my office. Well, I think Simel raises a very important question, but my hand was raised on something else, which is to agree with Marie on the entrepreneurial aspect of the entities we're talking about. So I think as long as the entity being considered has entrepreneurial activities as their main activity and main purpose object, I think those are the ones that should qualify to this filtering process. And at the same time, the main policy of such entity should be plowing back the proceeds, the positive results into the community democratically and in an environmentally conscious way. So that's my point, that on the one hand, you have the main activity, on the other hand, you have the main policy as the basic filters to qualify any entity. Now, whether an NGO qualifies or not, in my view, would be on what the NGO's object or purpose is. If it is to create jobs through social entrepreneurship, by creating cooperatives, does it qualify? Perhaps yes, because it is an NGO which has as its central purpose entrepreneurship based on principled entrepreneurship. One of the examples, maybe first I would like to reflect on what Uma said about Amul, the Anand Milk United Limited. It is one of the largest FMCG brands in India. It's a large cooperative, but indeed it comprises several thousands of milk unions, and 80% of the dollar is returned to the farmer. So despite it being a huge, a large cooperative, as they say, it still qualifies as a SSE from our point of view. And at the same time, there is also another animal in the Indian legislation, which is the Indian the farmers producers organizations or producer companies that are within the Indian Companies Act. And they they have a list of principles that the entities should follow. The profit should not be distributed among the directors, and this is already in place since the 70s, but more further articulated in 2013, and most recently, if I'm not wrong, in 2021. So I invite the conveners of this group to have a look at the producer companies provided in the Indian Companies Act, which I think are a good example of an SSE that are, undefined in a way, because they mirror the cooperative structure, but they're not cooperatives; they are companies. And though they are in the legislation that is mostly for joint stock companies, public companies, this particular character, FPO or producer companies, is slightly different, and perhaps the SSC could give it an identity, a global identity. A question would here is, of course, we the effort, everything has to. I mean, if an entity does qualify as an SSC, there needs to be a mechanism to verify that. Now, more often than not, we would rely on the law, where these principles are listed, and if an entity follows or adheres to those principles, then the assumption is, at least at the national level, that the entity is part of SSE. But what about how do we validate or enforce these principles in countries where the laws aren't there of SSE? So won't those countries be considered in this exercise? That's the question. But other than that, I just presented my reflection. So thank you for giving the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Santosh. And Hyung-Sik, please go ahead.
Yeah, I need to intervene at this point because I think we open the Pandora box. So now the many different issues come out at the same time. So I try to a little bit arrange the discussion. So because I think it's better to stick to our plan for discussion to make the group different topics in appropriate order. So I will a little bit read this discussion to help to make our discussion more efficient. So because I think this question is about was about ICLS definitions, and particularly on the part of the principles are relevant for every country. And as we said, it was very aligned with the many in countries case. I would like to focus more on the second question about, so in the ISC the definition, there are the list of the entities we mentioned, and is there any issue with this list? And if there is no, because I think we can discuss about the social enterprise here a little bit, or the mutual society. So let's check this question first, and then move to another one in this way to a little bit organize our discussion. So I'd like to remind you that these are the entities mentioned in the ISC definitions, and there was some issue. Probably we can discuss more about social enterprise later on, but one of the issue raised by the member was that about the mutual societies, because the mutual societies it was considered more like cooperatives. But the Yannick Lucas from the AIM, who are representing the mutual societies, he said that they are more the non-profit characteristic than the distributing the benefit to the members. That was one thing I think. But in general, they recognize they are in line with this definition, and also the members share the different kind of organizations in their country, which might be related to other similar organizations. Or so I think we need to also analyze all these the different type of the organizations, whether they would meet this the SSC the definition, as statistical definition. So yeah, I think if there is someone who need to talk about this, the different the types of the entities, you can. This is time to talk. Otherwise, I think the most important part we can discuss is with actually this criteria, the 8 filter the criteria. So because these requirements are about all issues we already talked, like the distribution of profit or the democracy control, etc., etc. So if there is nothing about the list of the entities, I think we can go to this question and talk about one by one, with the all issues we had from the different experiences. Yes, Ray? You are muted. Ray, you are muted.
Thank you. This is related to the. I think this it is very important for us to really answer question number 2 related to the common characteristics, because in the Philippines, if we say SSE, it is related to an economic activity, an economic enterprise. So I think that is a fundamental question when it comes to SSE. Aside from the listed social characteristics, we should also list some economic characteristics, which is either an economic enterprise or just an economic activity. Because I think SSE should be a balanced social and economic organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Marie, Marie, I think the Quebec mentioned the same issue, the entrepreneurial dimension, as the key, one of the key criteria, no?
Yes, but in Quebec, we have a subgroup, which is called Autonomous Community Action Groups, which in France, for example, would be part of the SSC in the association solidarity economy type. So that's why when Marie-Paule answers entrepreneurial, she distinguishes the social economy from the solidarity economy, if I use the European terms. But I think what Ray just brought up is what is needed, economic activities. And that is usually to produce goods or services, whether mobilizing market, non-market, or even non-monetary resources. But you're producing goods and services. You're not just there to claim, defend rights, or preach. Not to say that these are not important, but to distinguish them from, like I said, the trade unions and churches.
But according to Thomas, the input, I think in Poland, you recognize also the religious groups in the social economy.
Yes, indeed, yes.
So I also know that in Belgium, there are people who consider the association, although they are just the human rights or the environmental issue, the association itself have some economic activities, the membership based or whatever. They produce some campaign, or these things are also the part of the economy in a large sense. So I think that the entrepreneurial dimension, or what is the economy, might be important the topic we need to discuss later on. Chiara?
Yeah, just to say that in carrying out our European study, we found some countries. So we had the European definition and we tried to apply the European definition into the national context. And we, as I presented, we asked national researchers to identify legal forms of types of organizations that could be, that fulfill the criteria of the European definition. And we had some countries, especially in the eastern part of Europe, in Czechia and Slovakia, in which we had a long discussion with the national researchers because there are specific legal forms. I honestly don't remember the names, but we mentioned them in the study, which are basically formed by the church. They are similar to association, but they are formed by the church and national researchers. In the idea of the national researchers, these type of organizations were in scope. So they were within the perimeter of the social economy. We had no clear operational criteria to apply to say they are in, they are out. So in the report, we mentioned them as a gray area. So we decided to include them, but we were not sure about the fact that they were independent from the church and religious organizations, just to complement the information.
Eduardo?
I just wanted to add that in Portugal, as in Poland and in other cases that Chiara probably encountered when doing the study, we also include religious associations, NGOs as well, at least the majority of them. And this has a lot to do with the national context and the way that our legislation then confronts with the existence of these entities. We could argue that either they have an entrepreneurship activity or not, they are part of the economy. This could be an argument, yes. But then we see that in our legislations, for instance, there are a group of organizations to whom a special status can be given, organizations that establish protocols with the state to offer services in childcare, elderly care, so on and so forth. And you see that NGOs can apply to this kind of statuses. You see that religious entities can apply to this kind of statuses. So you see, this is, at least for us, we ended up deciding and concluding that this type of associations must be included, all of them. And this was a decision we made, even if they're not purely entrepreneurial, if using the words mentioned before.
Okay, thank you. So I think among these five, the common characteristics, I think we can also have some the consideration about this dimension. So in our later work,
I think the ILO definition is very broad, both of this subject. We can put many entities in these statistics. I think.
Yeah, right. So our purpose is not to make
I think Marie wants the word. Sorry,
Sorry.
She's raising her hand.
Yeah. Marie, please.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think we can, personally, I don't think we can solve all the issues today. I think we need to raise them and maybe not decide upon them. May I share my screen with another slide, which I've not translated? I couldn't find the translated version. There. What we'll probably end up having is something, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Something like this, that you have a bunch of criteria here. I only use 4. and this is inspired by Henri Desroches, which tried to, at the time, locate the social economy, but applied to the Quebec case, for example, each of these limits or border has a borderline case inside and outside of the scope of the SSC. You can even have a representation of it that shows on different axes, as Simel suggested, the portion of resemblance to the criteria. So without saying that we will solve the issues today, I think we need to identify these issues and then come back to you with a proposal on how to spread the representation of each criteria. I think Simel had noticed in the chat that the 5 concepts needed to be modified. That's one thing that was noted in the chat. I think we have economic activity as an important aspect that was not part of the ILO definition. So we need to also look at what it means to in this group identify a criteria, a filter that was not so clearly identified in the ILO definition. So this is the comment I wanted to make.
Thank you, Marie. So let's move on. So I think the important topic you can discuss with this operational definition. So we introduced 5 from the SNE, MPI, the definition, and 3 from the ILO, the ILC definitions. And then there are some issues like, so I think, Marie, you can discuss one by one, also in using the argument from the members, no? So we can focus on this table. Yeah.
Can you go down one slide, because I created? Oh no, you're in the questions. Okay. I need to find my PowerPoint. Or you don't have my, yeah. You were there. That table.
Okay. This one?
Yes. Yeah.
This one. Okay.
Because they are all, the 8 are here, and we're trying to match them to the ILC definition, which was translated to 5 concepts. So what I did here is try to match the 5 SNA and PI++ requirements and the 3 ILC or ILO requirements that we could add to, that would mean amend the SNA. So for the first, on the right hand column, the organization should exist as an identifiable institution. That is a requirement to be an entity. So we can skip this one, I think. So the second one, F, comes, we added it because in our definition, we need to serve the collective and or general interest, which is the social purpose. So the organization should pursue a purpose to service to members, society, or the environment. That was not part of the SNA. Item 2 on the left-hand column, voluntary participation and mutual aid, which is part of the ILC definition. So the SNA shows membership in the unit is neither obligatory nor automatic, but involves some degree of voluntary participation. Should we or not add G? Their members contribute to the organization's purpose by their participation in its activities. Maybe not. Maybe it's already there in some degree of voluntary participation. So we could discuss this, but probably G is not necessary. Democratic or participatory governance. this is the ILO. We would need to add, they are democratically governed by members and or they favor the participation of members and employees in their governance bodies. Here we have the issue of non-member entities, which have trustees or, just the founders. So probably we need to adapt this or to say only one type of SSE entity corresponds to this and the other types don't have to, or democratically governed may be considered, as I mentioned, arm's length from donors and arm's length from each other. So we're acting in the name of society, which is the way we define public charities and public foundations in Canada, for example. So this can be adjusted. Regarding autonomy and independence, the SNA provides the idea that they should be institutionally separate from government, which poses the question of the Philippine case we were just exposed to. They are self-governing, that is to say they are not subject to control by other units. Some of the comments we received were, well, some are controlled by their federations, for example, but then probably that means that the identifiable autonomous institution is the federation and not its subsidiary cooperative. So this is something the SNA already provides for when distinguishing establishments from an enterprise and group. So this is the perimeters of the institutional units the SNA already gives. So, but we could discuss this. Where am I? The D, they are self-governing, that is to say they are not subject to control by other units. Okay, 5, the primacy of social purpose and people over capital. As Simel noticed, we should here have primacy of social purpose and people over capital, which comes from the ILC definition. So this translates in an empirical manner as they are not permitted to distribute profits if it is a not-profit institution, or they are significantly restricted in their ability to distribute profits, which is how the SNA defines a nonprofit institution and related institutions. So, did I do what you wanted me to do, Hilse? Yeah. Okay. I open the floor to you now.
So, yeah. If you see the one by one very shortly, I saw concerning the first point, Korean colleague raised the issue about in Korea, social economy is more concerned about related to social mission than their way of operating, like governance, other things. So also Eduardo also raised the issue, in Portugal, social enterprise is not yet in the scope of the social economy, but there is some consideration, so the consideration about the importance of the social mission. So I think but yeah, if there are some others who have this point, because some people, Korean colleague raised the issue is that more about if the organization work only for their own members, they might not be recognized as social. That is the case in Korea. But is there any similar kind of the issue in other countries? No? Yeah, Eduardo?
So in our case, we consider organizations like them, like those that have their members and that work directly to their members. We also consider the indirect consequences of their actions to the rest of the society. So we consider that they can either directly or indirectly serve the common interest or the general interest. So we have a more broadened approach to that kind of vision. And since I'm already talking, I do have a question. It might be a silly one, but it has to do with point A, actually, because what does identifiable institutions mean exactly? Because if it's having a legal recognition, or if it's having like within some registry that statistically we can identify them, wouldn't we be automatically putting aside informal movements? This is a question to consider.
I unfortunately am not the one that can answer this one. I think we would need someone from statistics to answer this one, because when I looked at it, and thank you, David, for raising your hand. Go ahead.
David, you are muted. David, you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I can't necessarily answer this question completely, but I also questioned what that meant. That it should exist as an identifiable institution. I mean, I think conceptually, whether we can measure it or not, it needs to be included. Now, just because a lot of informal sector entities, informally or unregistered or informally existing entities, can't be found on administrative or statistical registers, it doesn't mean that they're not making a significant contribution. So conceptually, they need to be included. And I think we need, in certain circumstances, to attempt to measure these institutions. Now, the extent to which they're identifiable or not depends on how hard you try to look for them. So if you're running an informal sector survey, for example, you use completely different methods to identify institutions. So the institution would be identifiable through an informal, through an appropriately designed survey, but not necessarily identifiable through administrative records. So yeah, I think I would just leave that thing a bit open as part of the operational definition as an area where we need to answer some questions. But I mean, I'm not an expert on the SNA. I haven't been involved at all in the development of the 25 SNA. So I can't really tell you what that is supposed to mean.
Yeah. Mansoor?
But I don't think it's an issue we should put out of hand. I think we need to clarify what that means, especially in this particular case.
Yeah. I think it's also related to issue the informal entities. So how we can integrate informal entity despite of this expression. So that would be something you need to check. Yeah, Mansoor, please. Mansoor, you are muted.
You're muted.
We don't hear you. No.
What about, can you hear?
Oh, yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, thank you. So I checked in the SNA 2025, and this terminology seems to be referring to what is known as the organization test in relation to measuring the third sector and related institutions. So in that sense, from our perspective, in terms of the definition of the ILO of the social and solidarity economy, the idea is to include not only formal enterprises, those that are legally registered, but also informal ones. And so this is why I shared the diagram. The idea is that if it's not incorporated or legally registered, does it have agreed upon set of rules, so related to membership, purpose, decision-making, etc.? And in that sense, this is important because otherwise it could become, for example, a social movement could not be an entity in that sense. So you may associate SSE with social movements, but the movement itself would not count as such, but maybe specific organizations could. This is my understanding in that regard. But of course, I wasn't involved in that sense, but that's a potential interpretation.
I think we need to note this point in relation to the informal entities. Yeah, I think it's a good point. And yeah, so we move to the second point, voluntary participation, the mutual aid. So here, issue was with the organization with non-member based the characteristics. So what's it? And also this is related to the next issue, the democratic and participatory governance. If there would be no membership base, So how we can check they are democratic or not? That was another issue. And I realized in the input there are some different way of understanding about the democratic governance and membership issue, because some of them mention about the members' participation in governance, and some of them mention about the participatory nature, like with the broader stakeholders, not necessarily members, but broader stakeholders. And there's also another issue is that at each level, like the General Assembly and board, and sometimes just only board, there are different level of the decision-making structures as well. So we would need some, the small mapping about this discussion to have some more comprehensive idea about, and yeah, whether they are contradictory or they might be compatible with each other, or there would be another type of the democratic governance, or for the case of the non-membership based organization, what might be the condition to meet this point. So that was what I found from the input. Do you have any other point on this too, the membership and the voluntary participation, democratic governance? Yeah, Simel?
Just want to remind you that the definition, there is a further complication in my opinion, and that is democratic and or. If it was democratic and participatory, it's much more straightforward. But when it's or, then I mean, it's a lesser level, no? And how we engage with that, how we deal with that. There's that, voting percentage, board composition, you're right. But do we need a difference, a more lax understanding when it says participatory, and how that would manifest? If it's not democratic, but is participatory, what is participatory in statistical terms? Thank you.
Yeah, Marie?
The suggestion I had made here about participatory, from what I recall from the ILC discussions, I mentioned, or they favor the participation of members or employees in their governance bodies. I included employees, which was kind of creative on my part, but we're at the ILO. So that could be completely discussed. It's my suggestion, and as I mentioned in my diagrams that I flashed a little earlier, you can have degrees of democracy, and at a certain point, some countries may say, well, that lesser degree to us is not part of our SSE model, and some other countries may say, well, it's social and it's environmental, so we include them. We probably won't have something as clear cut as we wish to have regarding such criteria. And also we have to wonder, the burden of finding the information, and is that information à jour? Is it alive, or is it too far away in time, so we can't really assess the reality of it? So all this we have to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. So I just wondered tomorrow if you could come in at about 10 and 10:30 instead of the afternoon. If you could...
Joanne, could you mute, please?
Yeah. Sorry. So Eduardo, please.
No, I just wanted to add that, well, for the traditional entities of social economy in Portugal, we understand this criteria has more than satisfied, either democratic or we consider it all of them as having a participatory governance. When we're thinking of social enterprises and the discussions we are having of the criteria to use to identify this democratic or participatory governance, especially for-profit commercial enterprises, we wouldn't see democratic control in them, right? So we are considering criteria just like Marie wrote here. So considering, for instance, the involvement of employees, this is a way to see it. We're also considering, although this is not, or maybe it shouldn't be considered participatory governance, but we are also considered dimensions like transparency, transparency in governance. Having their, you know, their, I don't know, reports in their websites or something like this. So this can also be something to consider revolving around this democratic or participatory governance, you know, just to add to the discussion.
Is there any country which allow only participatory the way? Not necessarily democratic, like Edward mentioned, you know, so open consultation or.
If I may.
Yeah, please, Marie.
I think this probably has to do with including B Corps type of entities into the SSC. They are private, for-profit. They don't have members. They have shareholders, but they are B Corps. And that, if I recall well, Simel, that was part of the discussion that brought this slash or.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. I was there, and this was one of the issues, and also considering some traditional forms of social economy where they're not completely democratic, but they're still social economy.
Okay, thank you. And if there is no more the specific topic on the issue on this, we can also go to the autonomy and independence issue. Yeah, Mansour, please.
Sorry, just in relation to the, I have a quick question, which is the relation between G and H. I'm not sure if there is overlap between them, because G is about member participation and H as well. So there may be some nuance that I am missing, but I wanted to mention one possibility as well we could address is participation of whom. So which person's participation is, so it could be, for example, consumers, employees in this case, maybe other members of the community. So just wanted to say that that could also be something that could help us.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, so that's also related to the issue of the stakeholder, the participation, and also membership participation. So what's the relations between two categories? We would need to discuss about that later. And concerning the autonomy and independence, because Marie.
Sorry, if I may. The nuance, the criteria G is participation in its activities, and that comes from adding mutual aid in the ILC definition. But it's so it's different than to participate into the governance. Participate to the activities is like I'm using the services, or these services are meant for me to use if I need them.
Thank you for your clarification. Actually, about the autonomy independence issue, I just wanted to remind that there was some topic that raised about also again Eduardo raised the cooperatives in Portugal can be have some the government members. So there is some other countries also have that kind of cooperatives who have the member as as government or the local authority in their cooperative membership. Sometimes they are considered like quasi-public, those cooperatives, or also the cooperative of the cities, the public authorities also exist. And the other topic was about the subsidiary of cooperatives or association. So what would be means independence for this kind of subsidiary if they are owned by cooperative association. So yeah, Eduardo?
I think Marie raised her hand before I did.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
Okay, thank you. Well, just to address the issue you rose, yes, in fact, in Portugal, we have a figure called public interest cooperatives, where essentially the state is one of the cooperators. This can happen, is a very residual situation. We're talking about 21 cooperatives in total. And in the beginning of our official statistics, our decision was to not include them because they would not respect the autonomy principle. However, we had huge discussions regarding this. We had several lawyers analyzing because there is a constitutional provision that states that all cooperatives, regardless of their form or their type of control, must be included in the social economy sector. So this, in the end, we decided to include all of them because of this. It is a constitutional mandatory issue in a way. So personally, in my opinion, in other contexts, if this constitutional provision does not exist, I would not include them. But in Portugal, we have this decision. But as I said, in the end, it's very residual. And this is the only type of entity within the S13 sector that we include in our satellite accounts. The only. Okay.
Marie? Simel, Marie first, and then Simel.
Go ahead, Simel.
I wanted to bring up the issue of this autonomy from government. In addition, we need to look at the political party and corporations. I don't know if we have any statistical reference to these in the SNA or elsewhere, but the political party one is a big real life issue in many national contexts where these community-based organizations, cooperatives, producer companies, etc., will be used for votes by political parties. So that's a big no-no. And then the latter, of course, and Chiara knows this very well from her work in Europe, is the issue with corporate associated, corporate-owned foundations. The autonomy from and independence from that is very important. Otherwise, all foundations are in Gates Foundation, Schwab Foundation, and it's that would be problematic. So I don't know how to statistically say it, but we need to say it.
Thank you. Uma?
Yeah, I want to just second what Simel said, because that's been also something in my mind largely, because today, the minute you get into serving the society, serving the environment, you have a lot of these corporate, as part of also the CSR policies, right? You have a lot of these arms that have come up, which set up these foundations and look into it. And clearly, even if they are for the social cause, I don't think we should include them. And I think we should sort of treat them as a completely different entity or part of the corporate one. The other one on the political parties, and I think this is super, super important because especially in the developing world again, and I get back to this point because I think the more I think about it, while I gave you some very good examples, I know of similar examples that I can give, which are basically run by political parties. And this is largely for voting purposes, right? At the right time, because you start off by saying that. And you also have similar associations kind of come in. So I think we might to look at this autonomy rule very carefully and ensure that we exclude these groups. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult later to also objectively analyze, as to, what is included, what is excluded. And I think those criteria should be very clearly laid down. I see the point that, I think it was Eduardo, right, who was talking about Portugal, or who talked about the 21 cooperatives, where they thought of excluding, and then they had the legal scholars coming in and saying that as per the constitution, they should be included. And so they have sort of included the 21. So either we do a case by case in a way, and work with legal scholars and try to see what are the limits? And that's where probably the question of the boundaries come, right? And we need to really think about it. Thanks a lot.
David?
Yeah, I think this boundaries issue, both with government funding or where the extent to which there's control by a political party or involvement of a political party, association with a political party, similarly with religious institutions that run charities or partly fund and support charities. I think these are issues that we need to be fairly clear on. I think we've already said that an entity in the SSE may be funded wholly or partly by government, but functions independently of it. I think we need to find similar criteria in cases where charities, for example, are funded wholly or in part by religious organizations, in cases where there are linkages to political parties, because I think it's quite a difficult boundary to work out here, and there are clearly organizations that we probably would want ideally to include, but I wouldn't want to be so strict on association or linkage to political parties or churches or the government or anything else, so to an extent that we end up excluding things that really we feel ought to be included. But perhaps have some kind of variable that shows, well, this is actually externally. The problem is that the problem with that approach is that the government, the political party, the church, or whatever, has the option of withdrawing the funds, and the agency ceases to exist or ceases to be supported. So it is a difficult aspect, but I think it's one that we need to take on. We need to consider it very carefully.
Thank you. Marie?
In our case, I'm a case now, I'm a country, we distinguish between the funding sources and the governance issue. You can be 100% funded by government or even by a trade union, but if they are not controlling the governance, if the governance is opened, then you could be part of the social economy. Regarding foundations, however, if the funding only comes from one corporation or one family, they would be called private foundations. And unless they move on to having a board of trustees that is in which the donor is not controlling, but then it can become a public foundation. So we need to distinguish the source of financing, even though it can be withdrawn from the governance issue, because it can be withdrawn with quite authority without even participating to the governance. We all understand that, of course. But in day-to-day decisions, and do you can you open shop and close shop on your own? Are you independent? Are you an autonomous entity that can decide we're not, we're closing shop, or we're entrepreneurial and we're opening shop?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very important point. So if you remember, the Chiara may say more about the Italian case, the 3 different cooperative federations were related to different political parties. So there were some countries like, some SSE organizations that have been developed by the political the alliance, but yeah, might be good important issue to discuss further. And I think that last point about primacy of the social mission and people over capital was actually mainly discussed in your input concerning distribution of the profit surplus. And then I found that there are some important issue like understanding about what is the non-profit, like patronage fund or the distribution of the surplus based on the economic contribution of the members is the same as surplus on the the dividend on capital or not, or this kind of the understanding is quite, I found that there are some difference among different countries. So also the level of the acceptance whatever the level of the non-profit or the limited profit distribution, etc., would be also we need to discuss, and also issue of the individual reserve or the asset rack might be also the point. So all these the technical tools which can make effective of this the primacy of the people and social mission over capital would be important point. And but I think it's very well also the argument argued in the input already. So we may go further on that. And we don't have much time. Just I want to remind that the table, this one will be, I think, the very important for our, the future discussion. So if Mari may give some more. Oh, sorry. Yeah, if we don't have time to discuss today, but if Mari have some something to indicate for further discussion, please.
Oh, well, I think it would be interesting to have another meeting and discuss further, and probably on a new version of this document after the discussions of today. But what this typology tries to do is to identify types for which calculating the economic contribution, for example, will be more coherent through types. So if you're not for profit, or if you're non-profit, it will be quite different regarding how, where did the value added go? And this discussion is ongoing in our other technical working group on measuring the economic contribution of cooperatives. The same being non-registered or being registered will make a difference in terms of, how hard do you need to work to get the information. And of course, social enterprise, we would need, I think it would be important to we cannot decide for countries which social enterprise should be part of their definition of the SSC. Let's understand, we don't have this type of control, but if the majority of members of this technical working group feel that social enterprises that are for profit and that do not limit the distribution of profits on capital, if most people say this is not part of the SSC, regardless of what happened at the ILC, saying B Corps should be part of the SSC, well, maybe this is a discussion we need to have further on.
Thank you. So for next year, the meeting, we plan to have another meeting in September, but we did not decide yet the topic because it would depend on what we discussed today. So what we need to think more about, the further steps. So we will come back to you with some proposals, but probably either it would be about the specific topic like informal entity or social enterprise, or some issue, some experience of the SNA or settled account on social economy. So we are considering one of two options to share in September, and also this end of December we will have the deep dive meeting where we will probably have more the strong agreement on the several points to produce some the solid base to go further. So I think that's more or less all for me. Mari, you have some. Mari, you raise hand? Yeah.
I just want to thank everyone for their contribution and apologize for bringing such a draft version incomplete, and I apologize. I did not have the time to do the research that would have been needed to have a better draft, but because of the timeline that the ILO has, it was decided that we should go ahead, and so it's a martyr version, and thank you for your comments on it.
Mari, it was a very good version, please. I don't think it was.
Thank you for the efforts.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your efforts. I think this was a very good discussion, and you've done a great job.
Mari, you have very high standards.
I agree.
To me, this was a very deep and thoughtful conversation. I know we don't have answers. We don't expect you to have all the answers. I mean, that's why we have the collective, the thinking together. And yes, we could move on to something else, but I think on that point, I agree with Marie, maybe deepening this and building on what we discussed and reflecting that for a next round of conversation would be good. The informal economy discussion, we started as a small group, but it's another big Pandora's box. If we open that, then it will need a big stream of follow-up as well. So maybe we try to bring some order to pieces of the chaos we started, bringing a reason to, and then move on to the other boxes further down the line. But thank you. This was wonderful. To my colleagues who are organized and all the great minds who contributed, Marie, Chiara, thank you for the good work, David, for all your contributions.
Yeah, thank you all for the participation and contribution for the today's discussion. And it's almost 2 hours since we start our meeting. So, is there any thing?
It's to applause.
Okay, it's applause. I saw someone raise a hand. I'm sorry. So before we wrap up our meeting, I want to suggest to take a group photo. So could you please turn on your camera, and Sujan, please help us to take a picture. Sujan?
I think we need to stop sharing.
Someone has to stop sharing.
Okay. Yeah.
Now on, is this a donor requirement? Korean government requires proof of photo.
It's just for the record. So,
smiling,
anyway,
happy faces.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'll let you know when I'm finished. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you for your time.
Meeting. See you next time.
Send the copy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
We share the copy with the group photo.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you,
Was,
Marie.
we navigated.
We navigated.